The metaverse is emerging as the next big technology platform and promises to be the next frontier for human experiences on the internet. Into the Metaverse covers companies, technologies, and trends that are bringing these promises to life. Join creator and host Jonathan Ross-Friedman, founder and CEO of Supersocial, as he interviews the brilliant minds that are building, shaping, and investing in the metaverse.
Welcome to Into the Metaverse. I'm Yon, and joining me today is Priya David Clemens. Priya is a longtime award-winning network news anchor and reporter who's covered everything from presidential politics to Wall Street meltdowns, and who has focused her journalistic eye on emerging technology over the past year. I invited Priya to do a new segment of the podcast. Every week, we'll talk about the most important and interesting news related to the metaverse. Priya, really happy to have you here today. Before we kick off the very first show of this new segment, I'd love if you can tell our audience a little bit about why you're so excited about this topic, and then let's dig in.
Well, Jan, I live in San Francisco, the center of the tech universe, it seems, certainly at least for those of us living in the bubble. That's what it feels like. And about a year and a half ago, when Facebook, one of our biggest companies, changed its name to Meta, and we started to see this explosion of interest in this thing called the metaverse that most people had not heard about, I got interested as a journalist, and I started going to some of the conferences around here. And what I found was that there was all kinds of fascinating new developments in technology, very few people actually covering it. From a real perspective, there are plenty of pundits who sit on the sidelines and say, oh, this thing is crazy, or it won't work, or, you know, this seems really pie in the sky, or, oh no, Mark Zuckerberg's made this terrible bet. And we'll get to that. There are questions about that. But there's also a lot that's very real, very nascent, but very real, that is coming up, that is bubbling up, that is going to be part of our lives every day. And it's going to be happening in our lifetimes, right? In the next few years here, we're starting to see things trickle in day to day now. And I wanted to be on the front lines of reporting this next page of our human history. So that's how I met you. I was thrilled too, because your Into the Metaverse podcast was one of my teachers and guides as I started learning along the way. And then you're just a cool guy, and it's been fun to get to know you and talk with you. So I'm really excited about working on this project.
Thank you so much. This is such a great articulation of, I think, what made you interested, which, to be honest, is not that dissimilar from, my journey, even though I've been kind of building in this space for 3 years now. But the podcast really came from knowing how confusing it is, and everyone talks about metaverse here and metaverse there. And when, Facebook changed its name to Meta, it kind of turned on the light on this new world that suddenly millions of people are kind of now bogged down by what is this thing and what does it mean? And, everyone shares this video of Bill Gates interviewing with David Letterman when David asked him, so what is this thing, the internet? And then Bill Gates says, oh, you can go and you can read like a newspaper, but you can read it on the internet. And David Letterman says, I love the internet, my newspaper just as it is. And it just feels like with the metaverse, because it's still something so new, almost like a sci-fi concept that was, written by Neil Stephenson in 1992 with Snow Crash. But it's like, it's such a conceptual thing that is foreign, because most of us who have grown into the internet over the past 20, 25 years, remember how long it took for grown-ups, anyone above 35 years of age, 20 years ago, to realize, wait, what is this thing that my kids are talking about? Like Facebook. And then there's like YouTube. And then there was like Instagram. Now I get maybe 5 to 10 messages on Instagram, on YouTube, and on Facebook from my mom. And she's 70, right? So and I feel
she's adopted. She got there.
Exactly. And now they're like the power users of these platforms. So it feels like the metaverse and virtual world, and we'll talk about all of that, was so early that it reminded me the concept of websites, Facebook pages, e-commerce, mobile application. And it just felt like yet the next wave of what the internet might feel like for everyone, aside of one audience. And those are anyone that was born after 2005, 2010, who are kind of the first metaverse native generation.
Well, I think that there is this question now, right, that has come about over the last several months of what even is the metaverse. And that's what you talk about at the beginning of every single podcast you do. You try to help people define it, hear how other people are defining it, because I think for most people outside of the bubble, when they think of the metaverse, they think of goggles that you put on. And that's not here, right? You and I are not doing this discussion in 3D. Maybe we will be at some point. I'd be curious when you think that version will happen. And let's just dig into the news a little bit, because Apple is coming out with this highly vaunted, highly expected and waited for 3D goggles. That's coming out June 2nd, at least from all indications. There's been some hype before, but this time it seems very real that June 2nd, we're finally going to see some sort of VR, AR device from Apple. What do you think? Is that going to be a game changer?
Well, I think it's a game changer by definition because it's Apple, right? If you're talking about Apple 20 years ago, maybe not. If you're talking about Apple of today, they are second to none in their ability to combine hardware, software content into device ecosystems that, are going to make an incredible difference for people's lives and inspire a whole new wave of creators to build content for those form factors. It happened with the iPhone. It happened with the iPad. It happened to some extent with the Apple Watch, where they've built content ecosystems that really made those devices the leading devices. People don't remember or don't even think about, but Apple Watch did not become an iPhone from a unit sales perspective, but Apple is the biggest watchmaker in the world from a unit sales a year.
I did not know that.
Yes, they are actually the largest watchmakers in the world. Think about it. There's watch companies who are 100 years old. And then Apple comes with the Apple Watch and bang, they're the
So wait, you're telling me that they're outselling the Swatch?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Apple is the largest watchmakers in the world. It's crazy. Think about it. Now, so why am I giving the example of the Apple Watch? I might be wrong, but I have little doubt that whatever product Apple launches with VR is not going to be an iPhone, at least not in the foreseeable future. And if you read the report that we mentioned from Bloomberg about the launch of the new VR device in June, Apple themselves seems like they have estimates of about 1 million units sold in the first few months or the first year.
Been dropping that estimate as well. They started out a little higher. Now they're at about 900,000.
Now, a company like Apple becomes pretty experts in under promising and over delivering over years. And I think that part of why they're so good at what they do. And so let's say they are reducing expectation. Okay, you're still talking about what, 10 million units sold a year? Like they sold 200 million iPhones last year in the last 12 months. So it's clearly not going to be, at least in the first few years, a game changer device for the technology ecosystem in terms of people thinking a world beyond smartphone. I think they're going to be a world beyond smartphones, but it's definitely not going to be a VR device because I think VR has certain use cases that are really powerful. And especially at that price point that people estimating $3,000 per unit for the consumer, we're really talking about the same level of cost that the iPhone had at the beginning. If you remember, the iPhone was $500. Like it took time until suddenly like billions of people around the world want to purchase an iPhone. Like the world has evolved. The world has changed. So yes, there will be a lot of people, 1 million, 2 million, maybe more, who knows, who will buy the VR device. But it will take time, if at all, for that VR device to become at a scale of a smartphone, maybe 5, 10, 15 years. So really, what are we talking about? We're talking about a device that will make a difference, I believe, first and foremost, to the category. When people will look at VR device, this potentially will be the inflection point where someone managed to build a device where the content that is available expand the audience and provide more motivation for people to use their VR device more than the 5 minutes that I've used Oculus Quest collectively for the past 6 months, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And I think that depends on the look and feel of the product. It depends on the heating. It depends on the way it makes people feel. And I think also, and especially probably, it depends on, is there going to be different use cases that become so attractive rather than something you use for fitness or for some casual games like Beat Saber and things like that. And I think that's the unknown. I don't think there's anyone, maybe even in Apple, who can confidently say, we have all of these amazing applications and people are going to love that. And so if you combine just the size of the category, the isolation that VR device creates, and the fact that it's going to be still a nascent product, I think it will be an inflection point for the VR as a category. But to say that this is the new iPhone, I don't subscribe to that. But I do think it will make a dent in the category and will propel more companies and more creators to come in and potentially create new experiences that consumers actually care about at a $3,000 device sale price.
Well, I think you're hitting the nail on the head here when you talk about the use cases, because one of the problems has been for Horizon Worlds, for example, Meta just got absolutely hammered over the experience of being in Horizon Worlds, and that it's too cartoonish, and that it's not a fun place to be, and that it's kind of deserted. Why would I even go there? Why do I bother to buy a headset and go into that world and have that experience as a consumer? There have been some industrial and more corporate use cases that seem to be working, but that adoption is still kind of slowly coming on board as well. Is there an experiential aspect that users will have if they buy an Apple headset that's different than anything else that's out there already? Or is Apple just tapping into the ecosystem of products and experiences that's already there?
What sets Apple apart, among other things, is their ability to bring the most incredible partners when they launch a new device, right? They've done it with the iPhone, they've done it with the iPad, they've done it with the Apple Watch. It seems like there are a lot of different partners, and there are a lot of names that have been thrown up in the air, like Disney, for example. And so I think it's going to be really interesting. What are they going to come out with, assuming they're launching in June? What are they really going to come out with in terms of the content? Because, content is king. And this is a new medium that I think there's been very little experimentation at a mass consumer level. We haven't really seen with Oculus Quest a massive diversity of experiences that became popular. There are very few apps on Oculus Quest and Horizon World that became successful, like Beat Saber and a few other games, and fitness, right? Anything that has a bit of motion that was well done became quite successful. And so I think that's the first question is, who are the partners that Apple is going to launch with this device? The second thing is how different it is and how more exciting it's going to be for people to play with these devices. And we've seen all the challenges with Oculus Quest. It's heavy. It's hot. You really wear it and you're like, when I put Oculus Quest, I feel the heat on my eyes. Then I take it out. I'm like, oh my God, it's like I came out of a sauna. And so I think all of those different challenges are really going to dictate consumer adoption of the product. And so I would say I am cautiously optimistic for Apple. It's hard to believe that this could be a total disaster because it's Apple. And I don't believe they will come out with a product that is not at least good. There is the rumors of Palmer Luckey, the creator of the Oculus Quest, saying the Apple product is so good, but who knows based on what he's saying it, right? And so I would say this. It's probably going to be much better than the Oculus Quest. It's probably going to have a lot of content. Is it going to sell 1 million or 50 million units in the first year? I probably would lean toward the smaller volume, maybe a few millions if they're really, really pumping the audience in the right way. And there's a lot of amazing partners who are launching, like Disney and Activision Blizzard, and Zynga is launching a game. And maybe there's like something related to sports, right? Like WWE, and you can wrestle. Like, I'm just starting to come up with my own game ideas that I get excited about. So I think that's ultimately what we're going to see. But I have no doubt that this is definitely going to be an inflection point for the category, which will lead to more investment, more content creators, more studio building. How long it takes, if at all, for a VR device by Apple to become a mass medium product, I think that's the big question. But if it still contributes to Apple $25-30 billion a year, which is roughly what the Apple Watch is contributing, that is a really nice business for them.
I want to point out a couple of other product features on it. One is that there is supposed to be some sort of cameras that look out so that people can communicate with you if you're in the same room without you having to take the headset on and off, which would be very interesting. Also, that they weren't able to put the battery pack into the headset itself, exactly for the reason you're talking about. It became really hot. And so they have that as a wired extra pack that's supposedly about the size of a cell phone that you're supposed to stick in your pocket. I don't know. The design sounds very un-Apple, right? In terms of the usual sort of sleekness and beauty that we're used to seeing from Apple. And so I think it's so interesting that we're looking at this moment in time in which Apple is taking a chance, is taking a risk, which we haven't seen for a while. I mean, they make head earbuds or AirPod Maxes or the watch. Like those are all very known and viable product categories. When we're talking about virtual reality, it's an unknown at this point. So it's so interesting that they are probably, from all intents and purposes, from everything we've seen, getting into the game in just a few weeks now. I do want to double click, as you say. I've been waiting for my chance to say that. I want to double click on something you said, which was about Disney creating content for Apple. Now, one of the pieces of news that has come out recently is that Disney laid off its metaverse staff. A lot of it's, the people who were creating this. At the same time that Microsoft closed down AltSpace VR, at the same time that we see layoffs from Meta, it seems like we've been hearing that actually we're in a metaverse winter, that all of these projects are being shut down. What does that mean for content? Is there going to be new content coming out? What do you see with all of this?
Well, first, I would say that metaverse winter or any winter is like any winter. What do you do in the winter? You go into the house and you do all the stuff you always wanted to do because now you can go outside, which typically leads to a lot of creativity, writing a book, writing a diary, like reading stuff and watching movies you've never done before. I love winters, which is why I'm so excited about the time we're at. And everyone talks about generative AI, and we can talk about that separately because, we talked off record how that contributes to the metaverse evolution, et cetera. But I love the fact that we're in a metaverse winter, quote unquote, because it really puts the focus on building and proving that there are real legitimate arguments for why virtual worlds in 3D and the transformation of the internet into a 3D realm makes a lot of sense. And there's a whole audience who are under age 20 or 18 who are actually every day spending 2, 3, 4, 5 hours in these spaces and are actually showing us that anyone who is saying the metaverse is dead is out of their mind, or either don't have kids or are just looking at things and the data incorrectly. VR, again, in my mind, and we talked about it today at the beginning, is not the metaverse. VR is one of multiple gateways into said metaverse, into these massive network of persistent, synchronous virtual worlds. And the metaverse, essentially, like the internet, will be device agnostic. We will access metaverse environment through mobile phones, PC, game consoles, VR headsets, AR headsets, mixed reality headsets. What do you think we're going to do when Tesla starts to be fully autonomous? People will access metaverse from whatever display and touch screens and voice enabled or computer vision enabled devices. And so that's why for me, the conversation about the VR itself as a device or as a form factor is so overestimated, because a lot of people combine that with the metaverse. And to be honest, it's because of Meta, right? Meta came out and said the metaverse, VR, and many, many people, millions of people associated those two things together. If you speak to Tim O'Reilly, who was on the podcast last year, he would tell you, this is probably already a metaverse, right? Priya and Yon are interacting in a single point of time, in real time. It's synchronous and it's virtual. We're not together in a physical space. And it's happened through a 2D device or a 2D screens. Maybe that's already a representation of a metaverse. And you know what? I kind of tend to agree. There's an element that I fully agree with Tim O'Reilly. And so I would separate the VR device category conversation from the metaverse, even though when you talk to other people, they might say full body computing, haptic gloves, Ready Player One type of shenanigans. That is really the only way a metaverse can become, which I also disagree, because I don't want to be secluded wearing gloves and outfits and helmets and all of that to feel like I'm in the metaverse, which is why I think there are going to be different use cases of why you use certain gateways, certain form factors, and all of them will be part of the next era of the internet.
You know, I do want to point out in a recent Guardian article, Nick Clegg, who's Meta's president of global affairs, had said, the metaverse isn't just about the detached worlds of VR, right? What you're saying right now, where we don headsets that take us out of our environment in the physical world and transport us somewhere new. VR is one end of a spectrum. It stretches from using avatars or accessing metaverse spaces on your phone through AR glasses that project computer generated images onto the world around us, to mixed reality experiences that blend both physical and virtual environments. That definition, it's really broad, right? Can we truly call that a metaverse? Or should we, start adopting the phrase that Apple seems to use, which is co-presence? Is there something else we should be calling this than the metaverse?
I think that probably everyone is right to some extent, and the truth is always a combination of things. If you'll ask people what is the internet even today, they'll probably give you 10 different definitions. So I don't think necessarily there has to be complete consensus on what the metaverse is. Just like the consensus around what the internet is probably incredibly, incredibly wide. If you will ask a 5-year-old girl and a 95-year-old man and a 45-year-old woman and a 25-year-old guy, what is the internet? You'll probably hear a bunch of different things, but ultimately they'll say, it's the way I connect with friends, access the internet, get what I need, purchase stuff. I don't think that's going to change. All of those definitions to me, which is why eventually we may even call the metaverse just, it's the internet. But I think what matters is what are the behaviors and how the technology helps us experience those behaviors in different ways. You touched upon one of the main ones, which is having a sense of presence, either individually or with other people, as Apple calls it, co-presence. If you listen to Dave Baszucki from Roblox, he calls it human co-experience. If you think about other elements of expression, part of the metaverse in my mind is that we are able to express ourselves through avatars. At the moment, Priya and Yon are the real ones, but we can well be 3D avatar form pretty soon, or an avatar that represents our personality, and it's right there, and we outfit it in a different way. And then the last piece is the way we socialize and interact with one another and consume content. And so in my mind, it doesn't really matter, do we call it metaverse, do we call it internet? For me, at least at a high level, really the metaverse represents the evolution of the internet into those new type of behaviors that are still pretty much driven by the core things we do: express ourselves, create, socialize, be entertained, shop, learn, work, etc., etc. Like, these are the things we do as humans, right? You can't really reinvent those. The way we are going to experience them because of these virtual world, more expressive technologies, integration of AI that can interact with us like a friend, interact on our behalf with our friends. All of those things are what I believe to be more groundbreaking rather than new type of behaviors.
So you definitely are not in the camp of RIP metaverse, see you later, you were around for a hot second, but now you're gone. Where do you feel that this sense of a metaverse winter has come from, that the metaverse is dead and it's over? Where is this all bubbling up from, and how much legitimacy is there to it?
What's the word?
I don't know, your avatar could say it though.
I need my Yon AI to come and
That's
my Yon
right.
GPT to come and help. I think it's about sensational media, right? The media world is so tough to get advertising, to get subscriptions. So I think reporters, God bless them, I think are just trying to do their job and attract eyeballs to what they write. So I think it's about a bit of attracting eyeballs. You want to be the most sensationalist and like being kind of like the metaverse is, and having those clickbait titles. So I think part of it is coming from there. I think the other part of it comes from lack of deep understanding, I believe, of the transformation of human behavior at the moment that has been happening for the past decade. There's a whole generation at the moment of kids who literally grew up inside these virtual worlds. Minecraft, Roblox, they are now young adults. They are now entering the workforce. They are now building next generation software, next generation games, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a bit of an underestimation of those behavioral shifts, these new generations and what they do on the internet. And also I think a misconception and still looking down at quote unquote video games. I think many people still perceive video game as that nonsense leisure thing that only kids do because they have time, and ignore the fact that really video games have evolved to be something at the intersection of social media, creativity, and commerce, all bundled into those places with a lot of sense of presence. And also, people who say the metaverse is dead really ignore the numbers. There are more than 600 monthly active users on Fortnite Creative, Roblox, VR Chat, Rec Room, The Sandbox. I mean, we're talking about almost 10% of the world population. I don't think you can say about that is dead. And by the way, that's not even gaming per se. Now I'm just talking about virtual spaces that are UGC powered, where people come to socialize and have fun. And yes, play games, but those are really an example of a representation of what these virtual worlds are and could be in the future. So I think this is where it's coming from. I think it's a combination of things. And as I said, I love it. I love when people say metaverse is dead. Great. Never been a better time to build, because guess what? No one said the metaverse is here tomorrow. It's a futuristic concept that even today may still not happen. But I think at the minimum, we will have some versions of it in different platforms, even if they are not fully interoperable.
Well, let's take a look at sort of the geopolitics of this, because while we're hearing that message a lot in the West, that the metaverse is dead, that it's slowing down, that it never really took off, that is not the case in China. China, it is going strong. Tell us a little bit about what's happening there.
You know, this is such a great question, because already a year ago, we brought on the podcast one entrepreneur and a writer from China to talk about the Chinese parallel metaverse. And, you know, I think China is really unique in a couple of things. The first one, as we know, there is the Great Chinese Firewall, right? Which is essentially China have really isolated themselves from the rest of the world when it comes to internet. A lot of Western technology companies have struggled to operate in China. I mean, Walmart potentially is one of the most successful companies, US companies in China. Kentucky Fried Chicken as well, Starbucks as well. No technology companies, barely. Maybe Apple alone, but even Apple is struggling with some of the manufacturing. And so China has built over the years their own empire of technology companies like Baidu, Tencent, Alibaba, ByteDance, which are the owners of TikTok, and JD.com, which is essentially somewhat like a massive e-commerce company. And all of those companies now have their own quote unquote metaverse efforts across devices, across virtual worlds, right? Let's not forget that Tencent is the first company in the world that really built a super app. That's WeChat. WeChat is the first app in the world that combines financial services, instant messaging, video calls, the whole thing. As it's like they took Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Amazon, Cash App, and shoved it into one app. They've done it over a long period of time. So China, in my mind, also has been a place of innovation when it comes to the internet over the past 10, 15 years, in a way that is only in the last few years have been truly comprehended in the US. And so I think what is happening in China now, they are creating their own version of metaverse and what it means for consumers and what it means for enterprises, which is why I think we're really seeing a lot of activity in China when it comes to metaverse, when it comes to work, digital twins, virtual workplaces, et cetera, because also I'm sure that after COVID, a country like China understands that a pandemic might happen again. And then what happens? Again, you will have 1.5, 1.67 billion people locked at home. How do you work? And so it feels like China operates at a whole different level than other countries when it comes to the integration of multiple technologies at the same time, if it's virtual worlds, gaming, internet, semiconductors, to really make sure that they are able to leapfrog what has been happening in the West and build their own kind of parallel metaverse with its representation that is obviously dictated by the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, and China has, been very opposed to allowing AI into the country in the way that we see it here. That's just been kind of released into the wild.
And crypto, and AI, and all of those things.
Also, right? Yeah. So Tencent reportedly canceled plans late last year, or in February, I guess, to develop VR hardware and software, according to this article in Forbes Business. So it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing there.
Well, probably not a bad move, especially if you consider that there is Apple, and then you have other hardware companies in China like Xiaomi that most likely will build something related to VR and AR, if not they're already building. Then you have ByteDance that announced, right, TikTok, ByteDance announced their own project in VR. And so it seems like also Tencent historically hasn't been a hardware company. And most importantly, let's not forget, Tencent is the owner or majority owner of some of the world's most innovative gaming companies. They own Supercell. They own Riot Games, the creators of League of Legends. They are an investor, a shareholder in Roblox. They even have a partnership with Roblox in China, right? So Tencent, unlike the other Chinese companies, their hands are in some of the greatest and most innovative game companies, virtual world companies in the West. So they have a slightly different, I would call it skin in the game, no pun intended, than some of the other big technology companies in China.
Well, Yon, I am going to be thinking here as a journalist about the most salacious headline I can for this episode to make sure we get as many eyeballs as possible. I think it's something like, founder of Into the Metaverse says the metaverse is dead, or does he? What are your final thoughts here as we're wrapping up? What's on your mind as we go into the week ahead?
Just really continuing to, the one thing I try and do all the time is to keep my eyes on what 12, 15, 10-year-olds are doing with their time. How are they consuming and interacting with content? Because the way they do it, that's pretty much what we can look for in the future. And I think when we're seeing young people below 18 spend almost 8.5, 9 hours a week, a day on not a week, a day on the internet, they are spending that time in places that is probably not email, like you and I, most likely. They're probably not spending it in Slack. They're most likely spending it in places like, Snapchat, Discord, Roblox, Fortnite Creative, Minecraft. That's TikTok. Like, this is where they're spending their time. And that's what I'm keeping my eye on all the time. And in the context of the conversation we have today, which is how Apple's VR device is going to work.
So I have an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old. So you say when I'm checking up on what they're doing online, it's actually research.
100%.
I could write that off as like, a business.
R&D.
Expensive time.
I think we can finish with that quote from this wonderful learning scientist. Her name is Alison Gopnik. And she said, "Children are the R&D department of the human species."
Love it. Love it. Yon, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to have you here.
Look forward to doing it again.
More to come.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Into the Metaverse. We hope you learned a lot and explored new aspects of the metaverse.